Hi neighbors, my name is Jerri-ellen and welcome to my channel. I appreciate the time you're taking out of your day to come by for a visit. Comment down below and introduce yourself. Tell me where you're from. Today I have a special treat that I want to make for you all. It's from a recipe from my home province on the east coast of Canada, Nova Scotia. It's Nova Scotia brown bread, and I'm going to use the help of my bread machine on the dough setting, but I'm going to finish it in the oven. You can make this by the same recipe. You could do this by hand or with a stand mixer. I'm just taking a little bit of an easy route and having my bread machine help me out with part of it. Okay, so I'm going to tell you some history after I get this going, okay? Now, I have my bread pan here that goes in the bread maker. 1 cup of warm water, warm tap water, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, top. I put 2 teaspoons of active dry yeast, and I put a half a teaspoon of sugar in there just to help the yeast along. And it's all, well, it was bubbling and foaming, and there's all kinds of activity happening in there. So I know my yeast is good. So I'm going to put that into the pan here, because you want to make sure that before you start adding like ingredients that really cost money, like your flour and molasses and everything, you make sure your yeast is good. So that's fine and dandy. 1/4 of a cup of softened butter, or you can use lard or shortening. Okay, that was commonly used and still commonly used, but we always use butter most times, so that's what I'm doing. And a half a cup of molasses. I'm using fancy molasses. I'm going to show you inside the pan in a minute. How is everybody doing? I hope that you're all doing well. And I hope that you'd get to try this bread. Nova Scotia trade in molasses started coming up from the Caribbean. And very, very popular recipe. Molasses in recipes from Quebec and down through the East Coast, very popular. Molasses is in beans, it's in breads, it's in cookies, it's in all kinds of stuff, and it's delicious. Okay, now I'm just going to take this over a little bit for you so that you can see what's happening. This is 1 cup of whole wheat flour. Okay, I'm going to put that in there. Okay. I loosen my flour before I measure it because I didn't weigh it. So you loosen your flour. I'll show you because I'm going to put some white flour in. I'm going to use 2 cups of white flour. You can use a bread flour or you can use all-purpose. All-purpose is what I use, but you can use bread. I loosen my flour. I spoon it in because you don't want packed flour because you might end up with too much of it. That's why I do this. And after it's overflowing, scrape it off. Easy peasy. That's 1 cup. This recipe I made so often I could do it with my eyes closed. It's that good too. That's how we used to make it quite a bit. I haven't made it too recently, just the other day. That's 2 cups, and I'll show you anyway. But anyway, let's just keep moving. Now, 1/4 cup of instant milk powder. Okay, you can use low fat or skim, whatever you want, just an instant milk powder. And now I'm going to put a teaspoon of salt. You can do it in the order of what your bread machine suggests, but this is the way I do it. Okay, so that's why I'm sharing it the way that I do it. Now I'm going to put 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon. Just a 1/2 teaspoon measure so that it would fit in there. If you go a little bit heavy on the cinnamon, it's not going to hurt it. I pulled up a bit of information I want to read to you. I'm going to put this in my bread maker. And I'm going to put it on the dough setting. When this is baking in the oven, now you can bake it in your bread in this here, but I like baking it in the oven. I just do. I just use the dough setting on this. I'm going to plug it in. Start. In 5 minutes, we're going to come over and look at this because I got to give you a tip. But we got to come back so I can show you what that tip is when this has been kneading for about 5-6 minutes. I pulled up some information just so that I can tell some of the history because sometimes I forget names and dates. Yeah, Lorenzo George Crosby. There's Crosby Molasses down home, and it's still popular today. He had a store in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, which is at the bottom of Nova Scotia, like towards, yeah, it's at the bottom. If you look up Nova Scotia on the map, I grew up in Cape Breton Island at the top on the island. On the mainland, down at the bottom, you'll see a city called Yarmouth. That's where his grocery store was at. And he traded, molasses. 20, he was only 20 years old, Lorenzo George Crosby, and he sold molasses to, locals and around. And in 1887, Crosby moved to St. John, New Brunswick. So it's still there. It's still running. It's New Brunswick. That's a neighboring province to Nova Scotia. Molasses was part of the early trade triangle that connected Atlantic Canada to the West Indies. After about 5 minutes into it kneading in your bread machine, go over and have a look. And if it looks really sticky, which usually that's the case, take a tablespoon of flour at a time and sprinkle it around and over the dough to help it not be so sticky. And if you find that it's dry, then just add a tablespoon of water at a time until it's not so dry. But usually it's the flour that you need. Okay. I have a loaf liner. I sprayed my pan with I sprayed my pan with cooking spray, and I put a liner in there that I sprayed as well. But you can just spray it. I just like using the liners. And when your dough setting is finished, you're gonna, with clean hands, you're gonna take this out. Okay, a tipperoonie here for you all. This was still a little bit sticky. I could have used more flour when I was adding flour to it if I was going to continue cooking it in the bread maker. However, I knew I wasn't, and I usually have a floured surface like silicone mat with some flour on it, but I did not have that ready. So Graham went to get me some flour, and I put it in a stainless bowl. He put some in a stainless bowl for me, and I dropped the sticky dough mess into that just so that I can form it into a log to put in the pan. So and then I'm just going to cover it with cling film, and I'm going to dampen a clean cloth and drape it over it as well. And I'm going to let this bulk up a bit for an hour to an hour and a half. And then when it is puffed up and at the rim or a little above the rim of the pan like this, I have my oven preheated to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to pop that in the oven, and I'll be right back. And okay, so after about 25 to 35 minutes, depending on your oven, your bread is going to be ready. And how you can tell is it's a nice darker kind of brown color than when you first put it in the oven. Plus you will start to smell the molasses and the cinnamon close to the end of the cook time, or the bake time, I should say, of it. And another little tip, if you wanted to, with the molasses bread like this, the internal temperature, if you wanted to check with your thermometer, you could use a meat thermometer to check the internal temperature of this, 190 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's done. I'm going to cut a piece to show you what it looks like, and I'm going to put a little bit of butter on it and have a little tasty poo. What can I tell you about this bread? It's not overly sweet. It is a slightly sweet bread, and if you wanted, neighbors, you can add raisins to this when you're kneading it, and have a molasses cinnamon raisin bread. It is really good like that as well. When Dad and I used to have this bread with our tea, we would put a bit of butter and some molasses, drizzle some molasses on top of it. Oh my goodness, so good with the molasses on it as well. I really hope that you give this bread a try. It is one that we grew up with. It is one of my favorite breads. You can't just have one slice neither. It's addictive. I have to say thank you so much for being here. I love yous all, and I appreciate the time that you've given me today. And I have the recipe in the description box, and I also make a link that you can click so that you can go to a downloadable, printable recipe. And again, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!